Welcome back to Dyson Sphere Program. My name is Nilaus and I will be bringing you another masterclass today on three very integral builds that will be constraining your base growth both in the early to mid game and also in the very late game. These are the basics that you are absolutely going to need. So I'll present to you the electromagnetic turbine, the supermagnetic ring, and the particle containers, also known as green engines, blue engines, and pink containers. Yeah, well, either way, those are the designs we have for you today. I've been putting some effort into this, of course, to make the best possible designs, and I hope that you are appreciating it. As always, with these designs that I'm presenting, they are available in the link in the description, takes you to my website. That is where there's a link to all of my designs, Dyson Sphere designs, mecha designs, and of course, blueprints as well on my Google Drive, so they are automatically synchronized, and they are, of course, available. If you want to download the same game, that is available to patrons. So that's, yeah, if you want to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and I really appreciate all the people who are supporting. So thank you very much. Right, let's take a look. So I have three builds to present, and they need to be built both in the early game, early to mid game, and in the late game. So how would I do this? Well, I've been sort of thinking, should I be making... first of all, I made a design that is the late game design. This is what you see here. And I was like, okay, so should I also make one early game? And then I started, well, what is the earliest you'd want to build this? And then I go, well, maybe you will only have Mark 1 assemblers, maybe you will have Mark 2 assemblers, maybe you'll have Mark 2 belts, maybe you'll have... And it just, there are too many variables. So what I've decided is that I'm going to present the final design. And then as you stamp this down, let's do that, then you can downgrade it with the upgrade planner to the level that you're at. And yes, it might not be performing 100%, but the advantage of having the same blueprint or the same footprint here that you have in the late game is that when you get Mark 3 belts or Mark 3 assemblers, then you will be easily just updating it and it works, or the Mark 3 proliferation. So that's why I'm presenting to you the final form, and then downgrading it to whatever your tech level you're at is kind of left for the viewer. The first thing is placement. This is kind of one of my standard builds. That means it takes 2 planetary sectors here. It takes this amount of space, and I have designed it so that they can be placed 3 next to each other in this area. I'm using planetary logistics, but you can use the interplanetary if you like. The placement of this is this point here. If you look at the squares, it is 3 squares from the side, 1, 2, 3 squares, and then 1 square in, and then you place the middle under that one. That is the placement. If you do that, then you place the second one at this point, and then the third one at also the 3 squares in from the side at the bottom. Those are the placement that will make sure that you can fit in all of these 3 designs in one go. And we're going to go in here. This is using a planetary logistics system. Now, the very first time you build this build, you don't have the planetary logistics because it is kind of an ingredient. The electromagnetic turbine is an ingredient for the planetary logistics, so you don't have that. But it's you can use this as a way to look at the inputs. Iron, magnets, and copper. Those are very basic ingredients, and then everything will be built as part of this build and at ratio. And this is, of course, ratio. If you downgrade the whole thing to Mark 2, it's Mark 2 assemblers, it's still going to be at ratio. If you downgrade to Mark 2 proliferation, it'll be slightly off ratio because I've designed it, of course, towards this level. But again, I would just highly recommend just get the proliferation you have at the level and then get it in. I get all of my builds get proliferation in with the fidget spinners, the drones, no, the bots, and I get all my resources in with the drones. That's just how I've decided, so that there's a consistent design element for all of my builds. This particular design is outputting at this tech level 15 per second of the electromagnetic turbines. Of course, if you only have Mark 2 assemblers, then it will be only 10. And if it's going to be less proliferated, it'll be some other number that I can't really come up with. The idea of this design is that it'll build the 15 here, but it'll also make the electric engines directly here. It'll make the magnetic coils directly in here, and it'll make the gears. So you don't have to sort of rely on having a separate build of electromagnetic or electric motors that sort of you have to scale up. Every time you scale this one up, you have to scale this one up independently, and maybe you're even bringing the magnetic coils as a separate build. That's something else you want to scale up. That's one of the things that I did previously. but it's just come to my, it's just come to the part that where it's too many external dependencies. I know that for me to operate successfully, I must have a lot of iron, magnets, and copper. So that's something I need to make sure that my Galaxy has enough of. But then I don't have to make sure that there's also enough electric motors, also enough magnetic coils for these specific builds or any other builds that need magnetic coils, for example. So I need to include that as part of this build. And therefore I can build this as a separate thing. I'm also including for all of my builds, I'm including a monitor here. This monitor is basically monitoring whether there has been any movement on the belt for the last 60 seconds. And the failure condition is that there's nothing moving on the belt and there's no cargo. Because there are two conditions where there can be nothing moving on the belt. That can either be because it's not producing, that's an error, or it can be because the buffer here is full, and that's not an error. So I only want to throw this warning, the global alert, when there is it is failure condition. That means there's no movement and there's no cargo on the belt. And this is what you see here, that I have that for all of my builds. And that means, for example, now I know that something is a problem with my processor build, and I should take a look at probably a supply issue on that. This is something I include in all my builds, so that's now also included on the blueprints. So this is the first of the builds, the electromagnetic turbines. It gets you started, and you can make the adjustments yourself to make it fit into your own build. If you have a bus build, for example, you can do that. Or you can just tear it apart and get inspired by it. It works really well. I'm not going to go into the details of how this belt is turning and twisting. It's getting there, and it works. It works as it should, obviously. Moving on to the second build is going to be super magnetic rings, and here I make a slight deviation from what I usually do, because I have designed this super magnetic ring so that it doesn't fit. Well, it does fit still here, but it doesn't use all the space here. But it actually fits in this region here, the one that is 10 squares wide. And I did that because I felt that it is something that you don't need as much of this. This build is going to make 37.5, so just having two of these will give you 75 super magnetic rings per second. That's actually a lot. That's a lot of what you need for the entire base, and you don't really need to get bigger than this. And therefore, sort of imagining this one filling up this area is not really necessary. You can build it here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you already have 150, and that's certainly going to be enough for, well, anything that you can imagine, I hope. While on the other hand, the electromagnetic turbine is something you really need a lot of, so you'd probably need like hundreds of these per second, and with this one is only making 15, so it'll need more space. That's the reason for this. If you want to look at the placement of this, there's a specific way that I always place it, and that's how I design it. And these builds down here can be 25 tiles wide, but the builds up here can only be 23 tiles wide. So if I have something that's 23 tiles wide, it can also be placed here. Now you place it, if you look at the yellow marker, this is the line you want to place it at here. You want to place it in this tile, I think, the middle. So you hover it down and you go as far down as you can for the solar panels. This is too far, and this is it. The way you can see it is that the planetary logistics is slightly overlapping with the bolded white line of the second square. Place it here, and that should get all this done. This build is also made with the final build, and of course, like the other build, if you don't have this tech level, you will probably at this point have the planetary logistics. If you don't, then you have to bring stuff in with belts, and that's again something that is so individual that it really doesn't make sense for me to start assuming how you build it. This build is using the stackers, or pilers as they are funnily enough called. The pilers are serving because I like to have a single return belt. The reason I like the single return belt is it's much easier to monitor because you only need one monitor. And I just have a thing that I'm guessing that the traffic monitor might be something that consumes more than average performance. So I don't want to have multiple monitors for the same build if I can avoid it. So that's why I prefer to get everything in on one belt. In order for me to get it in on one belt, then of course, since I have 37.5, I need to make sure that it's stacked. We're stacking it here, and it's coming back. Basically, the output line is going out there, stacking, and return. out there stacking a return, and there's no problem keeping this up. If of course you don't have the Mark III belt at this point, then you definitely don't have the Mark III assemblers, and then you will have kind of the same issue as well with this. But again, those are kind of the small variations that you can change for yourself. Also, the Proliferation Mark III is coming in here with bots, with bots, and that's kind of how it works. This is a very straightforward build. This is also why I built it out here. It doesn't have any sort of subcomponents, and that's why I felt that I could include some of these builds in the same build, because this is basically one of those standard builds where it goes builds out, builds back, done. And along the same lines, we're going to look at the third and final of these builds, because once you have that, it's just so comfortable. It's so easy. Here you do exactly the same. You place it so that the planetary logistics is on this line here, which means it goes one back. And also in this case, you place it so that the planetary logistics is overlapping with this white line. It's very important that you do this, otherwise there is no room for it in here. Put it down, and that means there's just enough space here between, and this build is extremely close to the same build as the supermagnetic ring, and that is not a coincidence. I try to make them as similar as possible when they're doing exactly the same thing. Again, here we're bringing in the electromagnetic turbine, which we already have, obviously. We're bringing in the copper ingot, and we're bringing in the graphene. I would say that the very first graphene you make, put it into a planetary logistics as soon as you can, so that you can bring in and get the particle containers. The particle containers will now make sure that you now have a ample supply of planetary logistics stations. And that means that once you've built the first thing, you might have to sort of feed it manually. Sometimes what I do is just handcraft the very first of these, so that you can have basically these three builds done very, very quickly, and then have this sort of the continued production of pink containers or particle containers coming from this build, instead of sort of making too much of a hack out of it. So handcraft the first one and stamp it down here, and then you should be good. This one, let's have a look at how much this is producing. This is producing 28 per second. So again, this is kind of the same as for the supermagnetic ring. Once you have this, you're going to be really well saturated for pretty much everything you need at this point. This is a very high throughput, and again, 28 of these, considering what you're using the particle containers for, is kind of limited. You're not really using it for something that is a constant supply. Of course, you're going to have a constant supply of planetary logistics and interplanetary, but since it's not really, in this case, used for stuff like belts, for example, then you're not going to have like a massive supply. So building 1, 2, maybe even 3 of them is just going to be fine. I think I have 2 of those, maybe I have 4 of those. So if you build like 112 of this in a base, then you certainly shouldn't have a problem. And that's 4 of these builds. So basically it will just take up 4 of these builds for particle containers, and then 4 of those builds for 150 supermagnetic rings. So it doesn't really take up much space on any planet, and then you'll be basically be done with that build. That's why I included it. It's a simple build. You can build it on your initial planet, or you can build it out in the world as you progress. And there you have it. Those are the 3 builds that I wanted to present to you today. As usual, they are available in the blueprint library, and for you to just include in your own game. If there are, it's unlikely of course, but if there are any mistakes, then feel free to correct them in the comment section, or during the live streams, or in my Discord. Then I will be fixing them and updating it, so that you can take a new version from the Google Drive as it gets updated. And I think that is going to be a very short and a neat little overview for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that this was useful with these 3 builds that will then make your early to mid game as well as your late game just a lot simpler by just stamping it down and moving on to other and more interesting designs for yourself. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care, and as always, stay effective.